This here is the Amalfi Coast. In July of this year, I had the honour to shoot a couple's elopement in Italy on the Amalfi Coast on film. Which was scary, by the way, but more about that later. And in today's video, I'm showing you how that went and the results from that trip. So this story begins in Japan. It was right in the middle of my time there earlier this year when I was exploring some parts of the country and working at the same time. One day, an email reached me asking whether I'd be interested in shooting an elopement in Italy in the summer. I of course said yes, because I mean, how cool is that? As far as I've understood the story, they were looking for a photographer in Europe because they didn't want to fly one out all the way from their home, which is Australia. And somehow I popped up in their search on Instagram and they liked my analog photography work and wanted me to shoot their elopement on film. That was the part where I thought, sounds scary, but I'll agree anyway. And so planning began. The elopement was scheduled for the 1st of July. By that time, I was going to be back in Austria, so Italy was just a brief trip down south. I booked a flight, accommodation, rental car and started preparing the shoot, as in thinking about the style and what exactly I want to photograph, location scouting on Google Maps and stuff like that. And then on June 30th, my trip began. As always, when it comes to getting to bed on time to get up really early the next morning, I am running late. I wanted to get to bed at about an hour ago. But yeah, I'm doing my best and hopefully I'm not too tired tomorrow. With not quite enough sleep, I caught my early flight the next morning anyway. That all went pretty smoothly and I landed in Naples, where I then made my way to the rental car dealer and received the keys to this cute blue Fiat Panda. All that was left to do was drive to a small town called Braiano, which was less than a 2 hours drive away. However, I don't know whether any Italians are watching this, but in case you're from Italy, does everyone in Italy drive like that? You must know, I'm not the most confident car driver, especially with rented vehicles, and my usual driving environment is Austria, which is pretty chill, quite angry and annoyed at times, but mostly safe. Whereas in Italy, I was being careful, but felt more like I was dodging the cars that came from left and right and that at speeds that definitely weren't safe. So I had some troubles, but after about an hour of driving, there was less traffic and I ended up driving on some really beautiful roads. I arrived at the accommodation and sort of checked in, got organised and then headed out again to explore the cute little town and then walked down to the beach. This place is pretty small and so I was actually not that surprised when I simply found the couple by chance at one of the beaches that I went to for some location scouting. This was the first time that I met Tully and Caleb in person and we ended up having some time together at the beach and then also had dinner together, which made for a really lovely first day. And then the next day was going to be the special day. So the plan for the elopement was super relaxed actually. They decided to speak their vows at their accommodation and then just stroll through the town and look for some spots to shoot and just approach this whole thing with chillness, which I think is not very typical, but it was very nice. I certainly loved the idea and prepared all my gear the evening before. So my goal was to shoot mostly film, but also shoot digitally as a backup just in case. I've been shooting film for quite some time now, however, in a situation like this, I just don't feel safe enough yet to fully rely on the analog medium, and so I just felt safer to shoot both, with the Sony a7 III on one strap and my Pentax K1000 on the other. Additionally, I had my Olympus Mu 2 170VF with me to shoot some casual extra impressions of the day, which, by the way, turned out really nicely. I'll show you later. Then when it comes to the film itself, I decided to shoot something I'm not quite used to, which I'm still not sure was actually that good of an idea. I'm very used to shooting Kodak Gold, probably the film I shoot the most, and recently in Japan I had been shooting a lot of Fujicolor 100. However, to allow for some flexibility, I decided to buy some higher-end film and got myself a couple rolls of Portra 160 and Portra 400. The 400 was for later, during or after sunset, whereas the 160 was for daytime photos. And in my Olympus, I had a roll of Fujicolor 100. With all that in my bag, the next morning I had a laid-back breakfast and then made my way up the steep stairs of Praiano to walk to Tully and Caleb's accommodation, and so, work began. But before we dive into the photographs, I want to briefly show you how I like to present my work online on my website, which is run by the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is a great all-in-one website platform that we photographers can use to make our website. I've been using Squarespace for about 3 or so years for my portfolio, and that is where I present the different projects I've worked on or am currently working on, ranging from short films to photography projects. So here you can look through my work with a little thumbnail and then click see more if you want to know the details, where I've either placed the finished work or it says something like work in progress. What's great about Squarespace in my opinion is the user interface, because someone like me who doesn't have much experience with website building can use Squarespace rather easily without needing to watch hours upon hours of tutorials. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can start off with one of their many templates and then customize those to fit your own needs and taste. Head to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your website, you can go to squarespace.com/Crawford to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for supporting me in my work here. I really appreciate it. On that day, I didn't really film anything because I was fully concentrating on the work, so let's jump to the results and walk through the day by looking at the actual pictures. After my arrival at their place, I prepped a couple things and then shot a few photos of the various items connected to the elopement, but not yet the couple who were still getting ready. I took this chance to photograph the shoes, the dress, the jackets, the vows, and the rings. These aren't the great elopement photos I was aiming to take that day, of course. These are just nice complimentary photographs to capture the whole day down to the details, so that at the end of the day I have a wonderful and diverse set of photographs that tell the story.
Seems like forever.
Then, once everyone was ready, Caleb stood outside with me and Tully came through the door and walked up to him so that they could speak their vows to each other and exchange rings. Anyway, during this time of heights and emotions, they just took their time and did what they wanted to do, and I tried to quietly move around them and document everything. For the final delivery, I ended up choosing quite a mix of both analog and digital photos that I took. Personally, my favourites are the smiley ones that came from the vows, including some jokes that they read to each other. After that, we decided to shoot a couple portraits around the house. I started off with some classics, such as this one. I really like how this photo turned out. The location with them seated in the spot of light looks pretty cool, and the film handled the lighting very pleasingly, I find. Then we shot 2 more locations inside of the accommodation, and something we had agreed upon is that the photography shouldn't be all too serious and we could try a couple more silly ideas as well. I really like how this one turned out, which kind of makes fun of the overly serious look of theirs while leaning over to the camera. We then also shot a couple photos in the bathroom because of the wonderful and slightly quirky design. After that, the plan was to go on a walk and shoot at a couple different locations for maybe an hour or 2, and then take some time off, rest, have lunch, and meet again in the evening when the sun is lower to shoot again. As we were moving from one location to the next, that was the moment for the Olympus to shine. I just shot a couple non-polished, more candid photos, which I think turned out quite nicely and act as a wonderful addition to complete the series. The first location, that was just around the corner from the accommodation, was this beautiful tree. I like this one. Then we continued and I shot a mixture of more portraits and candid shots, and then occasionally also these wide and more minimalistic photos. We then arrived at the road's curve, from where you get a really pretty view of the sea, and from the road's angle it can actually look quite dramatic, and that is where I shot these photos, which I think turned out pretty nice. Here are some photos from the rest of this session, including some mandatory classics of course to showcase the rings. And that was it already for the first session. It was really hot and the lighting was tough, so we decided to leave it here and continue when the sun is lower. And that is when I shot this photo, which I really like. We met at a church from where we planned to walk through the small paths of Praiano down to the beach and end the shoot at the sea. In this particular photo, I was quite fond of the composition and how Tully and Caleb could neatly become part of this scene instead of what we usually did, which was a more close-up photograph of them. Here's another example of what I was saying before. I'm fond of how the photograph simply pictures a scene and they are part of it. Not that I dislike the other photos, but the combination of both makes this series more diverse and hence feel more complete. Here are two shots that I mistakenly slightly underexposed, but I think it actually looks quite cool, so lucky me.
You tell me you're scared.
This is another shot that I really enjoy. The sun wasn't actually that low yet, I just exposed for the highlights. I love how the framing worked out here, with them right in the middle framed by the tree and the bushes. Here you can see I occasionally also shot a landscape to further expand and complete the entire series. Then we moved to the last two locations before descending the stairs to the beach. I was keen to shoot this spot because of how well the flowers could frame them, which I think worked out alright. Next we walked down a bunch of stairs which led down to a small and rather secluded beach. On the way I had the Olympus out again to shoot a couple more casual shots.
And I'll back you up.
Here, however, I asked them to stop for a moment and take in the view while I shoot a couple extra photos because I really liked the vantage point and the lighting, which worked out so well in the result I find. Here again, I exposed for the highlights and didn't mind the shadows going all dark because I wanted to go for this pretty dark look, even though it wasn't actually that dark yet. The indirect backlight on their heads just looks so good. I'm really happy with this one. Then, at the beach, we shot my favourite photos of the elopement. The plan was to shoot a couple more portraits and then finish by having them jump off a rock into the water. The first set of portraits was next to the sea with a boat in frame, which ended up looking pretty epic, I find. It feels a bit like a dramatic film scene. I'm really happy with these.
You say you're afraid.
And then I asked them to go to a certain rock that I had spotted the day before while location scouting, and the idea that I had was to have them completely surrounded by the rock because I was thinking that could look pretty cool. The result, I must say, turned out even better than I had anticipated. I think this might be my favourite photograph of the day. Using the rock as not only the backdrop but the entire surrounding environment did end up looking quite epic. But something I didn't see while shooting, which I only happily accepted as I converted the negative, is the diagonal change of colour from warm orange tinted rocks to the cooler bluish tinted rocks. This is not something I added in Lightroom. The film somehow interpreted the rocks' colours this way. I just didn't expect the change of colour to be this apparent. Anyway, after that, Tully and Caleb climbed up the rocks and counted down to jump off together. I stood below on the side with my digital camera ready and set into burst mode, which I wasn't expecting to need on that day, but I was very happy to have it at that moment because that meant I could shoot about 10 or so frames of their jump and then just pick my favourite moment of them in the air. By the way, as you can see in the motion blur, I chose a slightly lower shutter speed. Well, it wasn't that slow actually, it was 1/50th because I wanted to mimic the blur that you'd see in a film because I was trying to make these photos look like stills from a film. And that worked out splendidly, I find. This moment just after they jumped is my favourite. I think what I enjoy here is the open arms and stretched body position that looks so free and open in a way. Here's another shot I selected which illustrates how the body language changes to a more protective pose right before impacting the water, therefore I really like the prior picture. After they made their jump, I kept shooting because the scene of them swimming and coming up to the rocks again was quite cool actually, and they had a big hug after, which I'm happy to have caught. I honestly don't remember whether this totally tilted angle was on purpose or whether I was just being extremely hectic here, but I must say, I like it a lot. I remember that in the editing process I actually exaggerated the angle a little because the original was less angled and just too little to look intentional. Now I find that it seems intentional to add that sense of excitement right before they hug and kiss. And finally, I ended the shoot with a couple casual shots from the Olympus and its flash, which I think completes the series wonderfully. In my delivery to them, I ended the series with 4 photos that just rounded it up by showing a couple details and landscapes. And so that was the shoot. All in all, it went well. However, I of course at that time didn't know whether the film photos turned out. I just had to hope that everything was fine. On the next day, I gave the 2 a lift to their next accommodation, which wasn't far from the route that I was driving anyway, back to Naples. And so we drove down this distressingly narrow road, and I dropped them off and just went back hoping that nobody comes from the other direction. Everything went well, and so in the evening I flew back to Austria. So let me conclude. I think I did an overall pretty good job, but with some room for improvement. I'm so happy everything went well. Tully and Caleb are lovely people, and it was an honour for me to photograph their elopement in Italy. I had a lot of fun. The photographs I think turned out nicely, however there are 2 main points that I want to improve on after this experience. Firstly, I'm quite relieved to have had my digital camera with me as a backup. Thanks to it, I was able to shoot in burst mode to get these shots, and also I did end up with a couple shots that I exposed incorrectly, which I could replace with a digital photo that was very similar. So I started this job feeling insecure with only film, and unfortunately after the job I still feel that way, so the journey of improvement continues. The second point I would like to improve is the photographic diversity, because in the whole series I feel like many photos are quite similar to each other, which isn't inherently bad, but I feel like a bit more diversity in compositions and styles might be a nice way to mix up the series a little more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story and the photographs. Before saying goodbye, I would like to give a warm thank you to the lovely people supporting me on Patreon. Thank you to each one of you. If you're interested in Lightroom presets, tutorials or postcards, you can check out my page via the link in the description. Also, I have a print shop in case that is of interest to you, also in the description. With that said, I hope to see you again soon. Until then, goodbye.